Megan, welcome to the lockdown sessions. The first time we're going to chat together. I'm very excited about this.
Hi, Brad. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
So, a South African living in Uruguay. Should we start there?
Funny enough, I actually just did a LinkedIn post on that exact story. So we can. It's up to you.
You're based out of Uruguay at the moment, and you operate as a coach, an empowerment coach. I thought it would be cool to get your perspectives on leadership and coaching and what it's looked like during lockdown and how it can play such a huge part at a time when everyone feels quite vulnerable and yet are being told to be more vulnerable. So I'm intrigued. Why don't you start us off with how the journey was able to link what you love in your yoga to what you do, which is your coaching?
Yes, beautiful. Well, I mean, my personal development journey, it all started with yoga. Yoga was really the beginning of my journey. And it was really about creating awareness to move from the mind space into my body space. And even just the simple awareness of understanding where all my organs are in my body was something that I just never really thought about before yoga. And so yoga really shifted my perspective and made me feel more connected to my physical body. And when we are more connected to our physical body, we're also more connected to our emotional body. And the intuition, which is our gut feeling, it's all connected to the body space. It's not connected to the mind space. So yoga for me was really, what catapulted me on that journey on this journey rather, of self-development, emotional intelligence. And, it's been 11 years since I've been doing yoga. And so it has been a beautiful and long path that I've walked. And coaching was only really something that officially came into my life in 2019 when I studied to become a coach. That said, I wasn't looking to start a coaching business. I was actually running and operating my restaurant in Cape Town, South Africa, which I had for 8 years from the age of 24, and I had 30 employees. So for me, it was really important to learn how to become a better leader for my people. And so that was the intention behind studying to be a coach. And it's been an incredible journey. Many things have contributed. One of the most powerful things that happened in my life was actually my dad getting stage 4 cancer. And that was in March 2019. He got diagnosed, and I left the restaurant and I went to spend 3 months in my hometown of Johannesburg to actually take care of my dad for what ended up being the last 3 months of his life. And that was really, it was a massive shift within me because it really forced me into my emotional body. And so yoga was really, brought me into my physical body, and I started getting more in tune with my emotions. But I feel like in many ways I walked quite a masculine journey in that I had never developed the language around my emotions to really understand, what am I feeling? How does this translate into language? And so, having the yoga and then this experience where I was like forced into my grief to really just feel everything that I'd been suppressing in my life. And it all just bubbled up to the surface, and it was a very difficult experience. Obviously, my dad was one of the most special people in my life, and still is. And but also in many ways one of the most beautiful experiences. And that was the moment where I had made up my decision to leave the restaurant business. It wasn't in alignment with me for quite a long time, 4 years to be exact. But when you're leading 30 people, you can't just up and leave, right? And for me, it was really, it was really important that stayed and that it maintained its form and could continue running without me. And so that's kind of what pivoted me into coaching. I left the restaurant business. I started building a travel business. I came here to Uruguay, which is where I did an apprenticeship with a chef called Francis Molman. He's very famous all around the world. He was on that Chef's Table Netflix show. And yeah, the Argentinian chef who does the whole animals next to the fire.
Don't miss a bit.
Yeah, so I came here 5 years ago just for 3 months to do an apprenticeship with him. And so when I left the restaurant business, I thought, well, let me come here because I had some contacts, some friends, and I just wanted a new experience. And then building a travel business. So I was between Argentina and Uruguay doing that, exploring some options for hosted immersed packages in nature, and then the pandemic hits. And I was like, okay, so now I essentially get a clean slate. What do I want to do? And my energy naturally flows towards personal development. And so I thought, well, leadership is something that I always loved in my business. It was such a big part of running a business, as any entrepreneur would know, who manages people. And I guess I'd never explored the option of a coaching business because for me, in my mind, I wanted freedom after being so grounded for so long with the restaurants. I wanted to be able to move freely on my own accord. And I just never associated a coaching business with online. I'd always seen it as an in-person thing. And so the pandemic really shifted my mindset around that. And I was like, wow, I can do this. Like I can really build a successful business out of this. And so my business really only came to fruition as a full-time coach in 2020, which is such a beautiful gift.
What I'm loving about some of the recent conversations I'm having is the positive stories that are coming out of this, because we're bombarded, if you watch the news, with negativity the whole time, to the point where I've now stopped watching Sky News here in the UK, CNN. I can't get depressed all the time. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because the pandemic shifted everybody to create business opportunity for many, actually. I work with coaching on leadership programs all the time, and most of our programs are global or regional in nature, meaning that they're all done virtually. So actually, when the pandemic hit, I was disappointed because I stopped traveling everywhere. But actually, the work sustains itself. Sat here, I don't get to give you a hug when I see you. But one day I finally will, and we'll get to hug again. And it's that kind of feeling that actually there are some good stories too. You talk really openly, and thank you for sharing it about your dad. Like one thing that comes to my mind is how fortunate that you were running your own business.
Exactly.
Step out for 3 months, and I have no doubt how hard some of those 3 months and painful they would have been. But I also could imagine you being very grateful that you had the capacity to just go and move back to Joburg and spend 3 months there with your dad.
Thank you for acknowledging that. And it was something that I was so grateful for. You know, out of all of my siblings and my stepmom, I was really the only one that was able to be there with him every single day.
Right. Yeah, I don't underestimate it. And I think, you know, sometimes when we set up our own business, we talk about the freedoms, and I don't need to ask people to go on holiday. I can take time off whenever I want. Actually, you work even harder for even longer when it's your business. You never really switch off unless you're forced to. You don't ask anyone for holiday because you don't go on holiday. But if there's something important, you can just step into it with full commitment. And I think you'll always be grateful for those 3 months.
Absolutely. You know, I think my commitment to my father, no matter what I was doing, I would have dropped everything to be there with him, because that's what he did for me his entire life. And he was such a special human. But yeah, you know, I was very grateful that I had my own business and that I could be there, and that my team was so supportive that they gave me that opportunity to really just withdraw completely from the restaurants, because I just didn't have the capacity for both. And the interesting thing is, you speaking into running your own business, you work harder for longer. and especially when I'm passionate about something,
Right.
or about what I'm doing rather. And that's funny enough, I was there supporting my dad, holding space for him, but it felt like the first real holiday that I had taken in what felt like my entire adult life,
Right.
because I just didn't have anything else on the agenda other than getting up, making food, delicious, healthy food. Well, my dad didn't find it very delicious. He was
Running a
used to
restaurant,
junk.
I'm gonna call him out on that. I'm not sure about that. That could just be father-daughter play.
I made him shame, bless his soul. I made him drink all kinds of healthy smoothies and so on. But that was really my agenda. It was just to wake up, cook for him, feed him, be with him, spend time with him, and it was rest, for me as well, because I was nurturing him in his rest.
Which probably gave time for your ideas to ferment and grow and actually use the emotional journey you're going through to probably build out some of the ideas that you're now operating from as well. So
well, that's the interesting thing. It's so counterintuitive. We don't allow ourselves that being space, that time to really just do nothing, because we see it as unproductive, right? Yet that's often when our most powerful ideas come to us, because our space is not cluttered. We're actually opening up that space in silence to listen, to truly hear.
well, I know that my therapist always says to me, hey,
Great advice.
right? And I mean, it is. It's actually, how noisy is it for all of us right now?
And
What,
something you mentioned just about all of the negativity flying around in the world, and it's so important that we actually shield ourselves from a lot of it. If we're watching the news every day, they're wanting us to feel all of that fear that they're pumping into people, because that supports the systems and the control and the governance and how they hold the power. So, for me, I feel very grateful that I'm in the space that I'm in, because it doesn't mean I'm not surrounded by people going through difficult times. A lot of my family are going through extremely difficult times, and they're very close to me. So of course that's in my space. But because I'm in this beautiful place and in my life, I'm in a really good space. I'm in alignment with myself, with my dreams, my desires, my career. I therefore get to hold space for the people who are not able to be in that space right now, including my clients. So it's a very, very, I don't take that lightly, and I feel very blessed to be able to hold that space for other people right now.
At some point, your cup doesn't overflow with compassion and empathy. How do you make sure you notice when you need replenishing or regenerating? Because I'm hearing you're giving your energy freely, by the way, so there's no judgment on that. But when people are offered energy, human instinct takes it if it's a good, positive, flowing energy. I just wonder, are you good at observing yourself enough still that you can spot when you talked about connecting the body and the mind, getting out of the mind into the body, connecting the emotions? I'm hearing all of this. So I wonder, how do you spot the triggers and make sure you don't slip? Because, wow, that's a lot of energy you're taking on, right?
Beautiful question. And, it is a daily practice, and many things support me in it. Do I have great awareness? Yes, I feel like I do. Do I have blind spots? Absolutely, because I'm human. So, I have to be extremely mindful. I also work with coaches. I think every single person, if they have the opportunity, should work with a coach and somebody that really resonates with them. So I also am fully immersed in a coaching community online. And so we have monthly calls, and a lot of them I have beautiful friendships with as well. So I'm on a lot of these calls where not only am I checking in on myself daily or weekly, however often I can, I'm also being called out from people around me who know me and who are noticing things, because it's all in the energy. I can show up on a call and somebody can feel that my energy is not as grounded as it normally is. And so it just simply takes a question of like, what's actually going on? And then you stopped in your footsteps and it's like, oh, what is actually going on? And funny enough, when I don't catch myself, the universe very kindly reminds me.
It has a way of doing that. We are really insignificant. The sooner we get that, the quicker most of us will heal.
Exactly. So I'm always looking for the patterns. And, for example, a few weeks ago, I was just having connection issues with internet on my phone, my laptop. Every single challenge that I could have had with technology went down, and I fought it. I was like, I need to sort this out. I'm then running around to all these different shops, and the universe is going, slow down, silence. You need to connect. You need to ground. And there's so much resistance in that because I'm so used to going, right? And so sometimes we just get forced to mercy, where we really just have to stop. And then once I stopped, I realized how badly I needed it and how much I wasn't actually allowing myself to connect, to ground. And I need to be in that space to really show up powerfully for other people. So I always get beautiful reminders.
When you say that, you trigger a thought for me, because often we hear about how, especially during lockdown, the language of lockdown theory of how to survive it. We talk about connect with your environment, connect more with your teams in a corporate world, connection, because we're disconnected. So everyone talks about, we rarely talk about what you've just described, which is connection with the self.
The most important. And it's the most difficult because we're taught our entire life to take care of other people.
Right. So other people's belief systems are put on us, and we actually grow up believing that self-care somehow isn't a priority.
And being is unproductive.
So I love to run, and I've shared on this podcast before, I love ultra running. So I like just going out and Forrest Gumping it, just running and running and running. And I used to do races years ago. I always used to feel in that running that, during a training for a competition, I would really be in tune with my body, a niggle anywhere, and I would know just how long to take off. And it's funny when you talk about the universe. A couple of months ago, after finishing a year's sort of campaign on running, I started noticing how my body was, it was aching a bit after runs, or I wasn't really feeling the run every day, and I was forcing myself to do it. And I kept going and I kept going. And then finally, my groin went into spasm, and so did my calf. And for the last month and a half, I haven't been able to run, because the universe was trying to point out to me for about 6 weeks that I just needed to stop and rest my body. I wouldn't listen. I was pushing and pushing. So what did it do? It sent me a groin strain. Basically, now you can't walk. So go to bed and stay there for 3 days, please. I also believe that we have a power of control where that connection with self is built on practicing it.
Well, for me, the yoga practice is exactly that. Right. It's connecting. It's getting on my mat and showing up for myself, regardless of how much energy I put into it or how much energy I have on that day. It's just about that consistency of showing up for myself and meeting myself where I am. So tuning in and going, where is my energy? How am I actually feeling today? How is my physical body feeling today? What emotions am I feeling? And really allowing myself to be led from that place. And the more we do it, the more consistently we show up for ourselves, the more in tune we get with the subtleties. And so the more we start to understand the language that our body is using to communicate with us, because there is so much noise and our minds have all kinds of control strategies, and so we have to be continuously checking in on those, because the ego will try and run the show. And this is the beautiful thing, and more lessons that yoga has taught me is, when I first started yoga, it was very fast paced. I wasn't doing it to tune in because I wasn't even aware of that option. For me, it was exercise. It was a way that I enjoyed to do exercise, to work my physical body out. And that's how it started. And then as I progressed, I started noticing things like how I compare myself to other people in the studio. So instead of focusing and being present with my practice in the moment, I would notice looking around and seeing who's doing what, and then going, I want to be able to do that, right? And then pushing myself, and then something happening, something tweaking in my body, a muscle, whatever, just to bring you back down to earth and go, hey, like, tune in here. It's not about what's going on around you. It's about what's going on here with you in this moment. And I always find that such a beautiful metaphor for life, how we're always looking at what's going on around us and comparing ourselves to that. And, yes, we need the feedback from the outside world, but we first need to check in with ourselves.
Self-validation is the key to having higher levels of self-esteem, Megan. And often we are also brought up in most societies to believe that validation comes from others.
Of course.
Right.
And material things, right?
So with that comes success. So work hard and you'll be fine. Actually, that's not always true. It's a great start, but it's not an absolute. When you practice yoga now, 11 years in, I like what you say about the discipline of it. I kind of get that with meditation. So I try and meditate every day, and I count the days continuously that I'm going and meditating, because I'm still trying to build that practice. And if I break a day for whatever reason, whatever excuse I give myself and let myself off the hook, I go back to the start to build that discipline. Because I like what you say about it's time to check in with us. How do you get, from a coaching point of view, right? How do you get clients to start thinking like that? Because from a leadership and a corporate perspective, that's a massive way of generating good psychological safety for everybody, right? I mean, it's really valid right now. How do you do it? How do you awaken that kind of new approach to thinking? You've been doing
the beautiful thing is, as a coach, it's, a really, really great coach knows how to ask really good questions. And I simply cannot know what's best for anybody other than myself. And that is the exact thing that I lead female entrepreneurs through, is knowing that for themselves, that they are the only ones who can know what is good for them, what is right for them. And because I work with such highly ambitious, driven women who very much mirror my journey, they are constantly weighing their success up against the world around them. And so bringing them back to that is just asking questions, because our thought patterns, it's very difficult to get out of our thought patterns that we've lived in our entire life based on our life's experience. And so sometimes a really good question is just a different question, a question that we don't think to ask ourselves, because we're so caught in the thought pattern that our mind is operating in. Right. And so by asking different questions over and over and over again, it helps people to build that muscle for themselves, and so that they start asking themselves different questions.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because if I put myself in the shoes of a female entrepreneur, actually, I'm looking to you not just as a coach, but actually kind of a mentor as well. You're kind of 10 years ahead, maybe, of where I am. Do you see yourself as playing that kind of role model for people? because you've had a great journey, you've experienced highs, lows, pain, so you feel it.
And this is where checking in with the ego and working with coaches myself benefits me, because the second I step into that role of being a guru, right, or a leader or a mentor or somebody that knows what's best for somebody else, I've missed the mark. Yeah. You know, and that in that moment, I take away the power from the client. And that is counterintuitive. That's exactly what I'm trying to avoid.
The greatest piece of feedback I ever observed in a coaching program of leaders it was a 2-year leadership program. It was run in the APAC region, and it was 2 Australians, actually it was an Australian and a South African coaching each other. And the Australian was the coach, and the South African guy was the coachee. And the coach stepped into this kind of guru state and started offering loads of advice. And the guy from South Africa turned around in his feedback and said, in that moment when you started being my guru, you stole the opportunity I had to grow myself. I thought, yeah, that is exactly it. So what you're saying there requires us to get ourselves out of the way. For me, you're talking to the very heart of what makes a great coach. Get out of the way. It's not about you. It's all about them.
Exactly. And if my intention is to empower somebody by being their guru and pretending to know what's best for them, that's not empowering them, right? And funny enough, understanding and also being compassionate with myself, because at the end of the day, I am also human. So my ego is going to jump in. You know, there are going to be moments where I have blind spots. But again, to be a really powerful coach, and this is something that I've learned from my leaders who have led me, Preston Smiles being one of my coaches and Zion Kim being another, is that vulnerability piece that you spoke into earlier. And vulnerability is, for me, just being completely transparent, getting out of your own way, and not letting pride stop you from opening up a conversation that needs to be had. And so as a coach, it doesn't mean that I'm not going to make mistakes. It doesn't mean that my ego is not going to jump in, and I'm not going to say things that are taking away somebody's power, because it does happen, right? But it's about checking in on myself, reflecting on every conversation I have, and noticing, where did my ego jump in? Where was I out of integrity with myself? And is there potentially a conversation that needs to be opened up here? So, for example, this happened just yesterday. I was having a beautiful conversation with a female entrepreneur that I met through the LinkedIn platform. We just jumped on a connection call. There was no intention around signing her as a client or any attachment to an outcome, which for me is really important. And we started chatting, and she was telling me about a money coach, a financial mindset coach that she had just started working with. And so my question to her was, as a massive stretch for you financially? And she said no. And my answer to that was, well, then you're not going to shift your money mindset. Yes, that's what I've learned, because I've seen it happen not only to me through my experience, but also many coaches in my space who have really stretched themselves financially. And for me, that was the thing that broke me through my money mindset, because I can't ask other people to invest a lot in themselves with me as their coach if I'm not prepared to do that for myself, because leaders get to go first. And upon reflection of that conversation, in that moment, I assumed that I knew what was best for her. I assumed that because that was my reality, that it was the same reality for her. And so the first thing I did this morning when I woke up is I sent her a voice note. And I actually apologized. And I said, upon reflection, I realized that in that moment, I disempowered you. I assumed that I knew what was best for you. I assumed that you didn't know and trust in your decision and know what was in alignment with you in that moment. And for that, I was out of integrity. And I just wanted to share that and let you know that, that wasn't my intention. And I apologize. And those are the vulnerable conversations that most people are not prepared to have, because it's a pride thing, right? Then I'm not going to look like the guru coach that I want people to see me as.
Well, you know, even if I want to see myself as that, I've got a problem, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
I read a great book last year, Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Halliday. And in it, he talks about the fact that it doesn't matter who you are. Your ego needs to come out and say hello sometimes. So learn it, learn how to please it, but don't let it control you. And there's real truth in that. I love the vulnerability and the courage, actually, to call yourself out. Because my experience suggests that actually people may not have even noticed you were stepping out of your own integrity or trying to adopt a persona that they wouldn't even recognize because they just see you as Megan the coach, right? With that comes all the elements. So I love how you keep yourself honest. There's something very transparent about that. If I'm working in an organization and I'm milling around with 3,500 other people who are all working from home and I'm trying to create my space, you've talked a lot about kind of creating and holding space, and you separate those spaces out, the physical body and the space required to look after that, the mental, the emotions. How do you keep a balance of all of them? And I appreciate that we're not all perfect. We all make mistakes. We all slip. But I'm interested in what what a day would look like. You've talked about reflecting on every conversation. Is that a deep dive that you're doing post conversations? Do you sit back at the end of each day and take a moment to reflect? How does that work as a discipline?
So, it's for me, it's what I think of in this moment is when you coming back to yoga, when you're getting into a balancing pose, often we wobble in order to try and find that balance, right? And the balance is essentially in the wobble, because it's like we need to go from one extreme to the next extreme in order to kind of find some middle ground. And that's extremely true for me in my journey. But I try and ground myself every evening to do a reflection on my day, to notice, what can I do differently tomorrow to make tomorrow an even more successful day. But also meeting myself with compassion and knowing that I'm going to fall out of routine, and allowing that to be okay, because that should word comes up a lot. I should be doing this. I should be doing that. And so it really takes a lot of trust and knowing that I am always exactly where I'm meant to be. And if I can fully trust that, then I can embrace every moment for what it is. And often in the past, I haven't trusted myself that I'm going to get back on track. And so it's like trying to force something into place because I'm so afraid that I'm not going to get back there. And that's what I've shifted for myself, going, I know that I'm going to get back there because I always do. And it's important to me. It's a priority. And so if I can just allow myself to be in this space, wherever that is, right now, and trust that I will get back to where I want to go, then I can just enjoy the process and I can fully embrace it for what it is in this present moment, instead of layering myself with guilt trips and shame.
Right. Have you come across Teal Swan and the Anatomy of Loneliness?
That name has come up before, but I haven't done research into him myself.
It's a her. I think she'll resonate for you a lot. I've only been introduced to her recently. She talks about the anatomy of loneliness, how all of us are actually essentially alone and lonely. So how do we make these connections and deal with ourselves? A lot of the stuff you're talking, I sense her language. Look her up, Teal Swan. Really interesting.
Beautiful. Background. I will do. But just also to mention that my life as a coach, my life is my content. And because I'm writing all of my own content, I'm constantly questioning myself around what are my lessons? What is the lesson in this that I get to learn and get to share with whoever needs to hear this message today? And so after calls, I'm always checking in on myself, because integrity is extremely important to me. And integrity for me means being authentic to myself in each moment, and connecting with my physical body, my emotional body, and really aligning my words and my actions with what's being asked of me in that moment. And if I was not true to my word, and I was not embodying what I preach, then to me it's extremely important that I put that into the space and really presence that. Because back to vulnerability as an example, it doesn't help that we talk about vulnerability. A true leader shows what vulnerability is rather than talking about what it is.
And actually we do have to recognize that for some who have been brought up culturally not to show, or with an assessment of what vulnerability is. So what would I do that makes me look vulnerable? Example, admit a mistake publicly. Actually, how would people embrace you if you did admit that mistake and just move on, or admit it and also correct it, or whatever, however it plays out? We talk a lot about this courage and vulnerability. I'm not sure yet that people are quite ready for what they think being vulnerable means. And I wonder whether that's why there's so much talk about it, rather than just sharing it and saying, do you know what? I left my business and spent 3 months with my father in his last 3 months looking after him. And that's immediately me sharing something deeply intimate. So now actually feel my vulnerability, because it's raw, it's emotion, it's grief. And then you create such a deeper connection with people. I wonder whether the world will truly change.
Isn't that beautiful?
Well, I hope it is. Yeah, for me. And we talked offline. My connection with a more holistic view of the world and a more spiritual look on how to live. My transformation happened around 20 years ago, when I had my eyes opened to a whole concept of energy, real energy, working with energies. And I've always been fascinated by it. I met someone the other day who does paddleboard coaching. So he runs all his coaching sessions out on the lake on a surfboard.
Because sometimes metaphors really allow us to understand something on a different level, and it's more about embodying it versus understanding it intellectually.
Correct. Now, some people need to intellectualize things, others don't. I think it's good to have a mix. So I love the idea. So when you share your stories and journey with yoga with people, do you find that the female entrepreneurs you're working with, are they all already in a world of yoga, or do you find yourself drawing them into that world?
Well, the beautiful thing is yoga is just the practice that I use for the metaphor, but it doesn't necessarily need to be yoga. It can be dancing, it can be Pilates, it can be whatever form that person uses to connect with their physical body. And so it translates well into other things. And it's just something that I use as metaphors every now and then. It's not, it's not the basis of my work and what I do. It's a beautiful tool that I've used to position myself in quite an oversaturated market, to really just help people to think about what I do as a coach a little bit differently, and to really help them feel it in their body when they're reading my words, opposed to just the intellectual part of it. But, I just, when you were speaking about building connection and more intimacy through sharing vulnerably or sharing openly, firstly, I think a lot of people don't understand it because they are living their life based on society's values or the values that they were taught by their parents, their mentors, authorities, governments, all of that. And so it's really about understanding and learning about yourself first in order to know what's important to you and be able to share from that place. And often we withhold our love or vulnerability or honesty or whatever because we're wanting somebody else to meet us there. And so we're essentially wanting them to go first to give us permission to open up. And the opposite is true. It's very counterintuitive, but in order for us to receive everything that we're wanting from the world around us, we need to meet them there first.
I think it goes to what you said before as well. Leaders need to go first and role models. But even take it out of the leadership space, actually instantly, I think in any relationship, if you are waiting for them to give in order for you to give, you probably should end it there.
Well, it's that very basic thing that we learn from being such young children. Is like one finger forward, 3 fingers back. Yeah. The world is mirroring what we need to see in ourselves, but we're not looking, we're not listening, we're not questioning. We're constantly shifting the blame to the world around us because life is happening to us and not for us. Life is always happening for us. It's how we choose to see it. It's what questions we choose to ask.
Well, and that's what pings to my mind in that last segment when you're talking there. It's what is so key when I'm listening to you, and I think I feel I recognize this as well in my work, is it's all about the meaning people assign to a situation, a value, a belief system. That drives their behavior, their interpretation of an event. And I think unless you have that natural desire to ground oneself, to really have a look and see if there's anything there that's a little awkward you might want to iron out. Like when you talked before about auditing your own values, I love that. I've been doing something recently as well with mine, just checking actually. I always say this, do I actually mean it? How do I breathe life and actually qualify and quantify that value really is important to me? And it's fascinating because most of the belief systems and values we're taught by our parents, we don't necessarily agree with as when we're older.
And even what one person uses as a word, for example, freedom to me can mean something completely different to you.
Yes, well, precisely. And you even said it before, right? You wanted the freedom to do things for yourself. And it's like, well, what does that mean for people? Like, as you say, that word, that interpretation is important. Maybe that's where coaching is so powerful. It helps people create certainty in the meaning they assign to the things happening in their world. And it's a bit more pragmatic and honors the emotional and the intellectual side, because coaching will weigh it up. Whereas perhaps as human beings, we're wired to go down one route or the other. So we either overthink it or we overfeed it.
And always living in the dichotomies as well, the black and the white, when it's actually all in the gray. I remember sitting with a monk in Japan, and this is exactly what he was talking into, is everything is in the gray, yet we see it as black and white. And it's so backwards.
The world is not that binary, is it?
No,
so we can't,
definitely not.
Yeah, I worked with a supervision coach once who called me out for often giving binary examples of things, and she would always used to say to me, Brad, what sits in between those 2 points? I'm like, well, what do you mean? She goes, well, I'm thinking there could be around 1,000 different versions of that on a sliding scale. What about you? And I said, well, I don't know. It could be 10,000. She goes, it could be 1,000,000, couldn't it? But you see it in those two. What's that about? And it's true. The world is not binary, yet we are driven to see things with as much clarity as we can. So we make it quite, it's choices.
Yeah, and again, like, we're human, you know, so I still do it and I still get called out on it. And that's the beauty of working with coaches myself, because
Right.
I can trust that they're going to see the blind spot that I'm not seeing, because they don't go away. We always have them. And even as we start peeling off layers and getting a deeper understanding of ourselves, we just open up space for more to bubble through to the surface. And so there's always something to look at. There's always something deeper to dive into and to understand.
It's funny, isn't it? There is a thirst and a search for more understanding. It seems as though if you took all the messaging and advice that we've all been given about surviving the pandemic, in how to connect with people, if we did all of those things for ourselves, you know, here in the UK in lockdown, the one thing that they've been really clear about is going out and taking exercise, which is great for people who are going out and taking exercise. The lack of compliance here means that actually what that means is you have about 8,000 people in a park at any one time, just kind of sitting down in coats because it's so cold here, having a picnic because they've gone outside to do their exercise. And I smile and get frustrated in equal measure, because, you know, we've had a tough time with numbers. I know in South Africa they struggled as well. But, you know, even I was talking with someone this morning in India, and they've recovered from COVID. They were hospitalized. And he was saying to me, he said, Brad, you know, they talked about washing your hands and keeping a distance of 2 to 3 meters. He goes, that's fine if you've got running water in your house.
Exactly.
That's fine if you've got a house, let alone running water in the house. And
and I resonate with this, because in Africa it's the same. You know, 5 people are living in one tiny little room, which is a shack, and they're all lined up against each other, and they're expected to use these portaloos, which are like 1 per 1,000 people. It's obscene.
I remember when I was in Joburg a few years ago for work, driving around, and just in the parks had given up to just shacks being set up with literally people walking with shopping trolleys of their entire life belongings. And I think of that population, that part of the population, and I don't know how they have been able to navigate their way through the last 10 months.
No, I mean, it's you know, and then the government shuts down businesses. These people work to get out of their home situation because of how terrible it is. And now you're expecting all of these people to stay home in these tiny confined environments where they don't have access to water or food or anything. And now they don't have a job to be able to even buy food for their family. It's just, it doesn't make sense. But anyway, that's a whole conversation for a whole nother day.
That's a different episode. We'll do leadership in lockdown. Government leadership in lockdown will be session 2. Let me come full circle. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to you. You strike me as someone who looks at the world with the perspective of hope. And I feel that from you. It's a real positive energy. So what do you hope when you look out and you think, you know, fingers and toes crossed and all things considered, we should be coming out in the next year globally from this horrible virus that kind of spread itself across the world and shut us all down? What are your hopes as you look out, just for us as people, for the exploration of self? What pops into your head with that question as a final thought?
My hope is that people get more comfortable with change, because everybody is hanging on to this idea that things are going to go back to normal.
Right.
It's a new normal. It's a different normal. It's, you know, and speaking into thinking positively, The people who are going to win at the end of the day are the people who are already looking forward to how things are going to be different rather than how they're going to be the same.
Futurist.
Visionaries.
Yeah, I sense you're right. When people tell me about we're waiting for the new normal, I actually find myself being a little irritated and saying, what are you waiting for? This is normal. Be present, be here and now. I'm not going to wait for what it will look like in June. I'm going to be here and now. Megan, will you come back in a few months and have another chat with us?
I would absolutely love to.
Whatever the next iteration of this podcast series turns out to be, I'd love to have you come back. Oh, Megan, thank you so much for your time today, and we'll see you on another episode very soon.